Hi, my name is Patrick Minton, and I just spent the last 3 months working to help teachers in my school find better ways to connect with students through virtual learning. We'll get into that more in a minute, but first, a little background on who I am and why this was so important to me. I was born and raised in a small town in Lancaster County, PA. My K 12 experience was pretty standard for the time. Teachers talked, I listened, and we all went on with our day. I had some teachers who were better than others, but only a few who really connected with me and made me care about what I learned in their class. After high school, I went to Clarion University of Pennsylvania to become a teacher. I graduated with a bachelor's in education and a couple of minors in speech communication and acting. I was immediately hired by HCPSS to teach middle school English, and I did so for 6 years before transitioning to technology education. A few years ago, I decided to go back to school and earn a master's degree. I applied and was accepted into Loyola University's educational technology program, and I have spent the last 2.5 years honing my skills with different tech tools for use in the classroom and preparing to become a stronger technology influence in my building. This fall, it was time to put all that work to use. I developed my internship plan and began working with faculty at TVMS to improve the use of different digital tools to increase student engagement during virtual learning. Originally, I had planned to develop and build a school-wide podcast channel for students to share their learning from different courses throughout the building. This podcast would be shared in our school and local communities in order to build stronger connections between what happens inside the building and the actual world in which our students live every day. While still a goal worth striving toward, it became apparent after the spring's virtual learning experiences that a podcast was not what we most needed at Thomas Viaduct. Teachers left school in June frustrated at the lack of student engagement. Students left school more bored and disenchanted with education than ever. And with the first semester of the new school year guaranteed to be entirely online, it was clear that more effort should be spent finding ways to engage students and take some of the pressure off teachers in order to make this new school year one worth everyone's time and energy. I started by looking at the frustrations I heard most often from teachers last spring. First, students were rarely willing to use their computers, cameras, or microphones to engage in the synchronous lessons. Second, there seemed to be no effective way for teachers to connect with students to build and maintain strong relationships. With those two issues in mind, I selected 4 digital tools that were approved for use in Howard County schools and could provide some support for teachers to better engage with students and assess learning taking place in the online classroom. I also tried to choose tools that would be relatively easy for teachers to set up and implement and for students to access during instruction. The 4 tools I originally settled on were Pear Deck, Canvas Studio Quizzes, Flipgrid, and Actively Learn. At this point, with the approval of my principal, Ms. John, I set a schedule for my internship implementation. I chose to hold 4 workshops, one for each digital tool, spaced 3 weeks apart. Each workshop would introduce the tool to participants, guide them through basic setup, and allow for some time to practice using the tool before attempting to bring it into their virtual classrooms. My goal for these workshops was to help teachers through the entry and adoption phases of the TIM matrix and hopefully establish a solid foundation for them to continue moving toward adaptation and infusion. The 3 weeks following each workshop were focused on more individual coaching. Teachers could work with me in one-on-one or sometimes small groups to fine-tune their understanding of the tool and its benefits and limitations, and to collaboratively develop plans for more in-depth uses beyond what was covered during the workshop. These 3 weeks were also a time for anybody who was unable to attend the workshop to still benefit from the resources provided and begin their own process of learning and using the digital tool. I chose to begin the rotation with Pear Deck, as this was the tool I felt would have the greatest and most immediate impact on the classroom climate and student engagement. So, starting on September 8th, I held my first workshop for the TVMS staff, during which we covered many of the different ways Pear Deck could enhance student learning and relationship building, basic setup and use of Pear Deck within Google Slides, and data collection and storage of student responses. Pear Deck, which has a number of useful built-in features to accommodate different learning styles and preferences, allows teachers to develop interactive slides where students can draw, plot charts and scales, write thoughtful responses to questions, or work with a combination of those options in order to actively engage with the material and provide the teacher with a better grasp of student understanding and awareness of any gaps in the learning. It allows for teachers to hold private conversations with students in order to guide them toward deeper understanding of a topic or to simply check on a student's well-being. And all of this information is then automatically stored in G Suite for teachers to review later as needed. And, if that weren't enough, it does the same for each student. When properly implemented in a lesson, Pear Deck becomes an interesting way for students to take notes, practice new concepts, build relationships with teachers, and then store that work for later review and study. The second phase of my internship focused on Canvas Studio quizzes. Because HCPSS uses Canvas across the county as our learning management system, and because they had been encouraging teachers to use Canvas Studios as a way to store and share video content with classes, I thought this tool would be an excellent way to take advantage of what teachers already knew while adding something dynamic into the mix. Canvas Studio Quizzes, which works a lot like Edpuzzle, allows teachers to gauge student understanding of a video and its content quickly and accurately, and it allows students to complete the activity at a time best suited for their schedule. My third rotation was spent working with Flipgrid. Through Canvas integration, the use of Flipgrid was easy enough to add to virtual classrooms, though the integration itself provided some limitations to its use. Using Flipgrid allowed teachers to create a space for students to record presentations, practice speaking in another language, or participate in discussion threads over the course of days or even weeks. Videos could be set to private, meaning only the teacher could see the video. So for students with anxiety about sharing a video of themselves with classmates, this seemed like a great compromise. Best of all, Flipgrid discussions could take place alongside synchronous classroom sessions, so time in class could be spent preparing for the discussions, practicing the skills needed, and increasing student understanding of the topic before they recorded their Flipgrid response. My final rotation was going to focus on Actively Learn. However, in mid-October, Google added the Breakout Rooms feature to Google Meet. These breakout rooms were finally a way to bring small group collaboration to the virtual environment, which is something teachers were keen to include in their lessons. The breakout rooms also came with a number of potential safety and behavioral concerns, so teachers were hesitant and uncertain how to best use the rooms. Because of this, and because teachers had already been working with Actively Learn on their own and didn't seem to need any help, I changed my focus from Actively Learn to breakout rooms. So, how did it all go? Well, my first workshop was a much bigger success than I anticipated. I anticipated only 4 or 5 participants, but I was very surprised when more than 10 people came to the workshop. On top of that, many other teachers emailed in the following days to ask for the resources. They couldn't attend the workshop, but they were very interested to learn how to use Pear Deck as quickly as possible. I also spent those 3 weeks working closely with teachers to handle technical issues, such as whether or not 2 teachers could view the same dashboard, or what to do when the slides would get jumpy and become unviewable during the presentation. In fact, though the rotation lasted just 3 weeks, I worked with teachers and other staff on Pear Deck for the entirety of my internship. As it became more and more a part of daily lessons, other staff members began to see the value behind it and wanted to jump on board. The feedback I received was mostly positive too. Many participants were excited to learn about the automatically stored student responses and how easy it was for teachers to find and organize all the stored information. They appreciated the explanation of the teacher dashboard and the ways it could make the entire lesson run more smoothly, including methods for giving students private feedback and sharing anonymous student responses with the entire class in order to spark more discussion and thought. There were a couple of questions that came up during this time that I was initially unable to answer, such as whether each teacher needed to have their own copy of the slideshow in order to run a unique Pear Deck lesson. They don't. Or if 2 teachers could be signed into the teacher dashboard for the same presentation. They can't. I actually took these questions as a sign that things were going well. Teachers had learned enough about the tool to begin exploring things I hadn't considered. I never have a co-teacher, and until this year I was the only tech ed teacher in my building, so collaboration on lessons was not something I really thought about. They were taking what I gave them and running with it, which was the goal all along. I believe a large part of this immediate success is due to the tool itself. Pear Deck is a quick and easy way to improve student engagement and formative assessment with very little effort, and the payoff is immediate. Teachers were able to quickly see the value, bring it to bear in their classrooms, and continue moving forward with barely a hiccup in their plans. I also think, because it was the first workshop and the excitement of starting a new year was still fresh in teachers' minds, there were more people who had the remaining mental space for learning something new to use in the classroom. I bring these points up because, with my second rotation, I saw a dramatic drop in participation. Of the 4 tools, Canvas Studio Quizzes was my favorite. However, it seems that most teachers at TVMS did not agree. Only 4 teachers attended this workshop, and of those 4, not one of them ended up using the tool for their actual classes. For some, it was simply too challenging to use. For others, it just didn't seem worth the effort once they saw what went into it and what came out of it. One teacher who hadn't even attended the workshop did end up using Canvas Studio Quizzes after working with me through some challenges with Edpuzzle. I encouraged the switch because it was already integrated into her courses, whereas Edpuzzle was not. In the end, she didn't find Canvas Studio Quizzes to be any better or easier and was indifferent to using it over Edpuzzle. There was a silver lining, however. Though the content of the workshop did not end up helping anyone who attended, I did receive positive feedback about my approach to the lesson itself and the structure I used during that workshop. While not what I had been hoping for, it did let me know to stick to my approach toward the workshops. I just might want to reflect on the chosen tools and maybe ask for input from teachers about what tools to cover. Moving into the third rotation, which covered Flipgrid, I again only saw 4 people attend the workshop. This time, however, participants were very interested in using the tool. In fact, they had already begun attempting to do so. I didn't end up walking through the setup process because the teachers who attended had already been able to do that on their own. Instead, we shifted gears and focused on collaboratively brainstorming ideas for the use of Flipgrid and developing stronger educational practices. It was this approach that I should have taken from the beginning. I learned too late that many teachers had already tried using Flipgrid and were unimpressed. If I had understood this better, I would have approached this workshop from an entirely different angle in order to help teachers see new ways Flipgrid could be useful, or to try and find solutions to problems they faced when they used Flipgrid in their classrooms. For example, teachers often struggled with students who refused to show themselves in the video. Depending on the purpose of the activity, teachers could just set the default to private. When this is done, only the teacher can see the Flipgrid posts. This eliminates much of the anxiety students feel when posting on Flipgrid, as their biggest fear is often the reaction other students will have to their work. Another issue was the Canvas integration. It was often inconsistent, leaving teachers unable to find student posts and quickly grade the work. Last but not least, it just seemed useless to teachers of certain contents, like math. I could have set up different spaces for each of these issues, and more, and facilitated discussions on how to best handle each one. Had I done this from the start and promoted it as such, I believe I would have seen much better attendance. The final workshop, as I said earlier, was changed from Actively Learn to Google Meet breakout rooms. The switch happened for 2 reasons. First, most teachers had already figured out Actively Learn on their own and didn't need any help. I wasn't going to make the same mistake twice and plan an unhelpful workshop. Second, teachers seemed eager to be able to use the new breakout rooms feature, but were uncertain as to how they could best approach its use given the lack of sufficient monitoring tools built into the tool itself. Working with the media specialist at my school, I created a document of best practices for using breakout rooms. These best practices ensured that any lesson that used breakout rooms reduced the chances of students being put into uncomfortable, unsafe, or inappropriate situations while in those breakout rooms. And it increased the chances of the breakout rooms benefiting teachers and students, and allowed for students to demonstrate their ability to live up to high expectations of behavior and educational growth. Using this document as the center of the workshop, I developed an hour-long session that showed teachers what breakout rooms might look like to students, modeled the best practices so they could see how easily they could be incorporated into instruction, and allowed teachers the time to practice using the breakout room tools before working with students. I had slightly higher attendance than the previous 2 workshops, but still lower than I'd hoped for. Only 6 people attended. Those 6 participants, however, brought the most diverse group of participants I saw throughout my entire internship. The school's data clerk attended, as did a paraeducator, along with classroom teachers from a variety of content areas. Participants were most excited about the best practices document because it took pressure off of trying to figure out how to use the breakout rooms without creating a giant mess while doing so. Participants also appreciated the tricks I showed them for using Pear Deck as a tool for communicating with students in breakout rooms, such as the Pear Deck timer, which, as a side note, became irrelevant just a few days later when Google added a timer to the breakout rooms, and the idea of using Pear Deck feedback tools to communicate with students while they were in their breakout rooms. Along with the workshops were the emails, texts, and Google Meet sessions to help teachers with problems as they arose. Overall, most of these revolved around Pear Deck or breakout rooms, with much less follow-up conversations about the other tools I shared. Teachers were just not as interested in tools that had more risk in terms of time spent planning versus the potential payoff, and I don't blame them. This has been a challenging semester, and with only so much time and energy, we as educators have to decide where our efforts are best utilized. So, what did I learn from all of this? I learned that teachers already have most of the necessary skills. What they lack is confidence in applying them. During workshops, I would frequently find that my directions were broken down far more than necessary. Teachers were able to cruise through instructions in seconds. However, what they benefited from most was simply the permission to try new things or to use tools in certain ways. Why is this? From the different conversations I've had during my internship, I suspect there are 2 main reasons. First, there are always the pressures to be perfect in front of a class. This pressure comes from a very small minority of stakeholders, Most people involved in education know the incredibly challenging dynamics of a classroom and are always appreciative of teachers taking risks to engage, enhance learning, and improve student outcomes. Still, this pressure can be overwhelming, and teachers seem to be hesitant to risk facing any backlash, especially during virtual learning. The most frequent advice I gave to people was to lean into uncertainty, try new things, and let students know you're doing something new. Students are always very supportive when they feel like the teacher is human and can make mistakes. They'll help you if you give them the chance to. Second, there has always been a severe lack of time for teachers to plan and prepare. Teachers always feel like they don't have time to try new things because it can take away from tried and true tools and techniques. Providing a set time for teachers to specifically and deliberately play with a new tool means they're not taking time away from something else. That's what the workshop hour was for, so they might as well engage. I also learned that much like students, teachers frequently learn how to use digital tools with an isolated mindset. They rarely pay attention to how each tool works in similar ways to all the others. Teachers miss universal cues like the plus sign to add or create something new, or the file menu, and other universally applied digital design features. The more teachers are encouraged to pay attention to these structural similarities among digital tools, the more independent they become overall. Given all of this, what would I change for next time? First, I would not plan so far ahead. I created a plan that covered 3 months, and by the middle of the second month, it was clear that my time spent planning anything past the first month was time wasted. Particularly in light of the current educational situation, things are changing so rapidly that it is nearly impossible to predict what will be needed beyond the next few weeks. Instead, I would have a skeleton schedule in place but leave the selection of tools until the week or so before each workshop. At that time, it is more possible to gauge what teachers want and need, what is truly available, and how to best provide the time and resources for teachers to learn what they need to know. Second, I would restructure the schedule so that the workshop would happen 1 week into the rotation rather than at the beginning. I could still send basic instructions out on day one and allow teachers time to go through basic setup and implementation on their own. Then, when they come to the workshop, more time can be spent digging into the details, covering creative strategies for the use of the tool, and helping teachers move further along the TIM matrix. In the end, I enjoyed helping teachers work through their challenges with different digital tools. Sometimes it was just good to see them make progress. Other times, the challenges they brought were interesting and forced me to get creative in finding solutions. In any case, it was something I really enjoyed, and I plan to continue making myself available to colleagues as they develop their technical skills and move toward consistent adaptation and infusion levels in classrooms across our school by the end of the year. Regarding Pear Deck, the focus was on using Pear Deck to encourage student participation in lessons and to provide an avenue for teacher feedback that was private and safe. Long term, however, I would love to change the way Pear Deck is used. Perhaps by encouraging the creation of student-paced lessons, teachers can use Pear Deck as a resource bank rather than an active instructional tool, freeing up class time for deeper, more educationally challenging activities and projects. Canvas Studio quizzes could benefit from the same approach. A lot of class time is currently spent sharing information and providing students with basic opportunities to access and learn the info. If we can shift that work to independent learning time, class time can be spent on higher level tasks and collaborative activities. Flipgrid could become a place where students choose the discussion topics and engage in debate and discussion about the aspects of their learning that matter most to them. Right now, it's primarily being used as a way for teachers to gather information and assess learning. World Languages use it to evaluate students' abilities to speak Spanish or French. TechEd uses it as a place for students to present their results from projects. But it could be a much more fluid, organic place of discussion where students decide what to talk about, where to take the conversations, and why it should be discussed in the first place. Finally, breakout rooms are currently being used in short bursts of 5 to 10 minutes. With more practice, planning, and coaching, breakout rooms could become the norm for synchronous sessions, with students working in small groups and the teacher simply providing the space to do so and facilitating as needed to ensure student success. This would require a much more robust device for the teacher, as the limitations of breakout rooms would require a teacher to be signed into the Meet twice in order to both monitor the main room and move among the breakout rooms, something many teachers struggle to do with their current laptops. It would also require students to have a greater handle on the expectations, goals of the projects and activities, and interest in fully participating in the work being done. It's also important to remember that this work was all done in the name of virtual learning. Once the pandemic has passed and schools move back into the brick and mortar setting, the utility of these tools will dramatically shift. I see this as a good thing, though. Currently, students and teachers are simply overloaded with the digital setting, and these tools are being used as a way to coax students out of their shells and simply participate. When the computer screen is no longer the primary method of communication and connection, these tools can complement the learning taking place rather than work as the primary driver of learning. Ultimately, this is my goal. Digital tools should not be the primary method of student engagement or assessment. At the end of the day, education is really about learning how to connect with the world around us, and that can only be done part way through the use of technology. The human connections must come first. The real time, in person engagement with content and context must be at the center, and the digital tools can then be applied carefully, deliberately, and effectively to truly enhance and enrich the learning process.